Hello, fellow fantasy footballers. I'm here to discuss a very important topic that is plaguing current fantasy football leagues, and that is the kicker dilemma. Okay, so why are we talking about this? Because the kicker is an absolute crapshoot. It takes no skill at all. As we take a look at some of the top kicker splits, we see a lot of things. The first drafted kicker in the JEFL, Harrison Butker. Let's look at his numbers. 13, 4, 8, as high as 14, down to 5, 17. Justin Tucker, the number 2 drafted kicker in the JEFL. A little more solid, a little more consistent, but you still see weeks where he puts up 16 and weeks where he'll get you 5 or 2. And then we look at Younghoe Koo, an undrafted kicker in the JEFL. 9, 17. He's got 13, 20, 13, 21. These are not numbers we should be seeing from an undrafted player in fantasy. But this happened because we don't know what to expect from kickers. It's unpredictable, and it's just absurd. As you can see, the kicker position is unpredictable. We have scores as high as 20 to just as low as 2. Kick me when I'm down. There have been multiple occasions this season where a kicker was the difference between wins and losses. There was even times where the kicker was a difference between the high roller. That's $25 that people lost for a kicker. Okay? Week 2, Choki beat Rayo by 4.3 points. Choki's kicker outscored Rayo's by 10. That's a win for Rayo with no kickers. Coach topped Jones for high roller in week 3. I beat Jones by less than 2, but my kicker had 4 more than Jones's. That's $25 that should be to Jones, not to me. Week 5, Rayo topped Choki for high roller by 4, but Rayo's kicker scored 7 higher than Choki's. Another swap brings me to the dreaded playoff round 1. Choke eliminates Coach by less than 3 points. Justin Tucker was the difference. You got Eckler fumbling, man. That's me fumbling. Choki stole the money, man. Which brings me to my next point. Kickers scoring. This is the most controversial part of kicking. It's the scoring. The difference between a half yard, maybe 0.3 of a yard, could be the difference between one whole fantasy point. A field goal from 39 yards is a whole point difference than 40. Oftentimes, 1 point could be the difference between a win and a loss. I'm going to continue with kicker scoring because I just cannot make sense of how 2 19-yard field goals, those are chip shots, I could kick a 19-yard field goal, is worth the same amount of points as a passing touchdown. 2 chip shots is the same as a rushing touchdown, a receiving touchdown, a 60-yard rush, a 55-yard reception. 12 receptions is the equivalent to 2 chip shots, a defensive TD, a kick return TD, 2 chip shots. 8 points allowed defensively. You can go out and allow the other team to score 8 points. That's it, 8 points. And you're getting 5 for your defense. 2 chip shots. So, I know we like high scoring. Nobody wants to see scores in the 80s or the 90s every week. And losing a kicker might mean that. So, this is where I propose bringing back a familiar concept to inflate these scores back up. We should bring back 3 wide receivers. Hear me out. Wouldn't it be more ideal to draft wide receivers and running backs who are actually going to produce rather than a kicker who will likely be dropped on their bye week? Here's a list of players that were drafted after the first kicker in the 2020 JEFL draft. Justin Jefferson was drafted after Justin Tucker and Harrison Butker. Emmanuel Sanders, he missed 2 games, still had 96 points. Ronald Jones, 160 fantasy points. Tom Brady, after a kicker. Now let's look at some guys who weren't even drafted. James Robinson, 213 fantasy points. Mike Davis, Robbie Anderson, Chase Claypool, T. Higgins, Nyheim Hines. The list goes on. Look at their numbers here. Justin Jefferson, 168. Ronald Jones, 158. James Robinson, 213. Mike Davis, 161. Robbie Anderson, 154. These scores are all higher than the best kickers. And these guys got drafted after kickers because kicking is a crapshoot. It's an absolute crapshoot. Each team is loaded with wide receivers. We're in a 10-man league. Sometimes these receivers don't even make the lineup. Let's take a look at some of the third and fourth best receivers on each team. Jones, T. Higgins, Delby, Chris Godwin, Cooper Kupp, Coich, Galladay. Rayo's got Marquise Brown, Chokey, Jarvis Landry, Ja, Julio Jones, JR, Juju Smith, CK, Tyler Lockett. Plenty of big names on this board. And these are wide receivers that are third and fourth on our fantasy teams. We should be getting these guys into our lineups. We need a third wide receiver spot, and it should come at the expense of kickers. Removing the kicker position could open up an extra roster spot, obviously. So let's take a look at some wide receivers who are still currently unowned. Curtis Samuel, 168 fantasy points. That's better than any kicker. Tim Patrick, 139. Aguilar, 135. These guys are better than most of the kickers. And they're not even on our teams because we have to draft and roster kickers, man. So, for the good of the realm, please consider removing kicker from fantasy football going forward. Please consider adding a third wide receiver spot. We could also consider a super flex that has kicker. You could do super flex, wide receiver, running back, tight end, kicker, super flex. For those of you who can't live without kickers, still get them in there, man. We should make it a flex. That's all I got. I hope you guys please consider this. Thank you for your time on this very important matter. And like my boy Tyreek says, peace.